So this is the tele-seminar for the Five Latent Powers, and we're going to spend some time together talking about the Five Latent Powers and also talking about what the meaning of these powers are for us in this society. I became interested in this before my recent journey around the world, looking for sacred civilization. And briefly stated, I thought that it was important for us to understand what the capabilities and the capacities of human beings are if we're going to get out of the mess that we are in our society. I'm not interested in looking at these powers from the point of view of an individual developing an increased capacity for connecting to themselves, connecting to the divine or whatever. I don't believe that this is about individuals or individuality. My question and also my quest is for what would it be like and what would it look like if we lived in a society where the latent powers were activated? What would it look like and what would it be like in a society where our ability to see, understand, and interact with life itself came from a different direction? So, the first question is, if the latent powers exist, why are they important? And to me, they're important because we need to know what we can do, what we need to know, and who we need to be in order to create a world that works for all. It's not about how to manifest parking spaces or how to manifest $1 million for an individual. Oh, by the way, if anybody does know how to do that, let me give you my phone number and my address. But it really is about how do we focus on what it is that we need to do and change about ourselves and about our world in order to create a world that works for all beings. So the first question that we come to, and when I start talking about latent powers, is a field. What is a field? We're all familiar with the concept of a magnetic field. We're all familiar with the concept of a gravitational field. You couldn't walk down the street, you couldn't pour a glass of water unless you have a thorough knowledge of gravity. However, it's really interesting that even though you have an idea of what gravity is, an idea of what magnetism is, when you look in the books about what a field is, there's either this amazingly convoluted explanation that involves both physics and mathematics, or you come across Rupert Sheldrake's very, very straight and to the point definition of a field. He says a field is a region of physical influence, that a field is activity, a principle of activity. He also calls a field a modification of matter. Okay, so think about a magnet and think about iron filings on a sheet of paper. When you put the magnet near the iron filings, matter modifies itself. It moves toward the magnet. Now there's no other intervening. You're not pushing it. You're not shoving it. It's not falling. So there's nothing else that's making that field, that's making those iron filings operate, except by this thing that we're calling a field. so that fields will interact with and interconnect matter and energy. So fields are not matter. They influence matter. A field is not energy, but it directs energy. So this becomes a really interesting point, that we can't get our minds around the fields that we know exist every day. You know, if you have lights on right now, you're using the field of electromagnetism. Now, the interesting thing about that, I mean, if you're listening to me right now, you're using electromagnetism, and we don't really understand it. We just know that it works. I believe that, and Sheldrake believes, that there are other fields besides gravity, other fields besides electromagnetism, and that there's this thing that he calls the morphic field, and I call the life field. Now, we're using different terms, but I think we mean exactly the same thing. And that life itself is in a field, and we are like the iron filings inside this life field. That the life field has many, many subfields to it. Like there's a subfield called starlings, there's a subfield called guppies, there's a subfield called gray wolves, and all of these fields interact with each other. Now, my definition of a field is, first of all, I echo and agree with Sheldrake's definition. But fields are inherently holistic. They can't be divided, they can't be added to, they can't be subtracted. And a holistic mathematical equation is 1 plus 1 equals 1. You can't divide it. You can't add to it. You can make a field stronger by, if you take two magnets and you put the north and south poles together, it makes one magnet. That magnet is stronger than the two that are separated. If you, but it doesn't make it twice as strong. It just makes it more coherent. And so when we start getting into the latent powers, I want you to start seeing how these powers could interact with and could be caused by a field or fields. So here's a very typical and very elementary image of a magnetic field in operation. You're probably familiar with this from elementary school. That's how early this kind of science came about. And the thing that is most important is what you're seeing are iron filings. You are not seeing the field. The field is invisible. You can't see it. Just like if you, wherever you are, if you have a pen or an object that that won't break or you don't care about breaking, hold it about 5 or 6 inches above your table and let it go. It falls down. I don't even have to see you to know that your object falls down. Okay? Now, the issue is we know that gravity is working on the pen. The gravity is working on your body, which keeps it seated in your chair. And gravity is working on the moon, holding it in place. Now, the gravity for the moon, the gravity for the pen, and the gravity for the chair is exactly the same gravity, and you can't see it. You can't even measure it. You can measure the effect of gravity. You do that every time you get on your bathroom scale and look at what the numbers are telling you, because what it's doing is measuring the effect of gravity on your body, on the mass of your body, but it's not measuring gravity. You can't measure a field. You can only measure the effect of the field. Okay, so I don't want to belabor this point, but I think it's a very, very important one, we are living in a gravity field. We live from time to time in electromagnetic fields. Right now, there's 40 or 50 television stations sending electromagnetic waves through your body, through your room. They're broadcasting all over the world, okay? We don't see them unless we have a special receiver tuned to get that signal. Same thing with radio, same thing with Wi-Fi, same thing with everything else. And so we can accept those things. And I'm suggesting that we need to accept a consciousness field, to accept a life energy field. One more thing about fields and magnets. This is the 1 + 1 = 1 principle at work. If you see the magnet with the north and south poles, if you put the north and the south poles of the two magnets into an attractive mode where north is facing the south of the second magnet, if you bring them both together instantly, you've got one magnet that's just bigger than the one that was before. If you turn the poles so that that north and north are facing each other, you actually set up a repulsion from each other. You repel each of the magnets, and that will allow you to see that fields can be directional, okay, and I would say that the same thing is true with consciousness energy fields, that we can bring our consciousness together and achieve more than if we keep our consciousness separate. So, one last point before we go on, and this is all in preamble to the Five Latent Powers, is and this is just some language of holons and solons. The word holon was something that was coined several decades ago by Arthur Kessler, and by that he means a holon is an object or a being that is whole in and of itself. It is made up of other elements that are whole in and of themselves, and it goes on to make other objects or other things or other entities that are whole in and of themselves. An example of a holon would be you and me. I am a being. I am whole unto myself. I am made up of other aspects or other beings. My heart as a holon, my brain as a holon, my eyes as a holon, and all these systems interacting to make up me, but each one of them actually being a separate entity. And then they are made up of other entities, like my cardiovascular system has veins and capillaries, etc., all the way down to the microscopic animals that are living inside my gut. Now, I then and you go and comprise larger beings. I comprise a holon with my community. I comprise a holon with my tribe, with my work units, with my nation, with the family of other human beings. the family of other beings on this planet, the family of other beings that we don't even have consciousness for. Similarly, though, on the mirror image of the holon is what I'm calling the solon, the being who is solo and acts in such a way that it does not contribute to the whole of any other larger being. And the difference between a holon and a solon is the difference between a hive bee and a killer bee. The hive bees exist for the good of the hive, and the hive bee is more than willing to sacrifice its individual identity in order to protect the hive. I think you probably all know that when a bee stings you, the bee dies. It's something that kills the bee, and as many people as have been stung, that shows how many beings are willing to die to protect this notion of the hive. The so-called killer bee is a solitary being. It does not exist in a hive. It does not. It procreates itself. It doesn't need a queen to do so, and acts in the world as an individual and spreads in the world as an individual. I would say that the similarity between human beings that live in an indigenous relationship to other human beings and to the earth is one way of looking at holons. And those of us who have been raised in this society believing the delusion that we are separate are the ones that are acting in the world as solons. Okay, so all that was preamble. Let's start talking about the five latent powers, and let's start talking about this quest for the five latent powers and what these elements look like and what they could mean for us. So last year I went on what I called the Sacred Civilizations Journey to 5 or 6 countries, and I was looking for the roots of sacred civilization. I was believing that at one point in time, human beings lived in harmony and balance with each other, in harmony and balance with the earth, and in harmony and balance with a transcendent reality. And it doesn't matter whether you call these astral beings or avatars or gods or whatever, but a community of beings that did not have bodies. Okay, and what I was really looking for was some kind of an artifact. Okay, a book or the magic key or the reference point or something that would show that we have a relationship to these 3 aspects of being: relationship to each other, relationship to the earth, and relationship to the transcendent. And the thing that I discovered in the cave, in my meditative state, in my fasting state, on the Doak River, the thing that I discovered was that I was looking in the wrong direction. The question wasn't, what is the nature of a sacred civilization? The question was, what were people doing 10,000, 15,000, 20,000 years ago? what was the level or the nature of the ordinary human being's consciousness. And the thing that really took my quest in a very different direction was the download or the information that was given to me was that this thing that I was calling latent powers was something that was everyday, ordinary existence for human beings 15,000, 20,000, 30,000 years ago. It wasn't anything particularly special. What was special about it, from our point of view, is that we couldn't do it now. We lost the key element that allows us to do these sacred powers that I'll be talking about in a minute or two. And just like a person who has never ever been used their eyes before, had no idea what eyes were, raised by people who had no idea what eyes were for, raised in a society where all the systems and structures in the society negated the possibility of sight. We're raised in that, and now what we're trying to do is learn how to see. I'll tell you a quick story. Back when I was in high school, I went over to one of my classmates, a young girl, and I told her I was going to go to her home and study. I was hoping that study meant making out, but I did carry books over just in case I got questioned on this. So when I knocked on her door, she opened the door, and the house was completely dark. And that wasn't particularly surprising because in Camden, people would have trouble from time to time paying their electric bill and would have the lights turned off. That wasn't surprising. The surprising thing, though, was there weren't any candles going. There wasn't an oil lamp. There wasn't a flashlight, and she didn't look particularly apologetic about, oh, we don't have any lights on. And so she said, come in, and I was, I came in and was kind of stumbling around, and she says, oh yeah, and then she reaches over to the wall and turns the lights on. And she and her sister were there, along with her mother, the mother. And the mother was blind. She could not see. She could not use her eyes. And she raised her two daughters to function as blind people when the sun set. Let me rephrase that. She didn't raise the daughters to be blind. She raised the daughters the best way she knew how, and that was to raise them the way that she could function in the world, and that was as a blind person. So my friend was ironing clothes, and she could look at me and talk to me while she was ironing the clothes, keeping her thumb about 1/4 of an inch away from the tip of the iron and smoothing the fabric out with her hand while she's moving the iron around. The sister was cooking dinner, and she was cooking the food by touching it. And I mean, she's frying something, chicken or whatever, and she's just reaching into the pan and touching it very, very quickly. So she's not burning herself, but she can check the temperature and the doneness by touch. Well, at 15 years old, this just freaked me out, so I left, But the thing that struck me was, what if you had an entire society that had no idea what seeing was. Similarly, we in this society have either no idea what holonic consciousness is, the consciousness of being a holon, of being an integral part of the whole, or we get glimpses of it, and we think that the glimpse is the whole picture. It's like trying to go through the world and opening your eyes once for 10 seconds every hour. Well, you're going to miss an awful lot of the world. But if you do that, you're going to see a lot more than people who have their eyes completely shut. What I want us to do is open our eyes. And what I want us to do is to come into this full spectrum of the five latent powers. Okay, so we're done with preamble. And what I want to do now is talk about what these five latent powers are. So I think this is in order. The first one is collective telepathy and knowing. Second is spatial powers. Third is temporal powers. Fourth is communication powers. And fifth are bodily powers. So I want to spend a few minutes on each one of these, and then I'll spend some time wrapping up what all this means. So let's look at the first one, the collective telepathy and knowing. I think that this is the most important of our powers, that human beings have had access to the knowing capacity of other human beings and also other species. I can simply know what you know. That knowing is not restricted by distance. It is not restricted by time. Unlike what anthropologists tell us, that early humans lived a horrible life of, worrying about food and worrying about scarcity and worrying about being eaten by a mastodon or worrying about everything. That the ancient Holons didn't live in fear, did not live in scarcity. They knew how to talk to the life field. Those people who we call indigenous people, who come from the same culture, and that culture is the culture that comes from Central Asia. I'll be talking about the Zhangzhung culture at the Unity Church here in Portland, not this coming Friday, but next Friday. And I will be giving you, I will record that, and for those who are on the call tonight, I'll give you a copy of that. So I'll talk about, that virtually, I think absolutely, I'm still working on that part. All of our ancient ancestors shared a culture, and they shared that culture not because they were in physical contact with each other, but because they were in holonic consciousness with the field. They could talk to each other through the field. This explains many of the so-called mysteries of why agriculture sprang up around the world all around the same time. It was in the field, and you could just reach up into the field and grab it. There are other things that can't be explained by the traditional means of what we believe to be true about our early ancestors. In this collective telepathy and knowing field, it includes a group telepathy, where a group would know something, and that knowing would be held by the entire group, for an entire group. group knowing. And in this regard, we know the abilities of the early Polynesian navigators, and some of you have heard me use this example before, where the Polynesian navigators would travel vast distances over vast tracts of ocean, and they were not stumbling around trying to find the next island. They knew exactly where that island was. Okay? They would put exactly the right amount of food in the canoe to get them to the next island. They didn't have to, paddle around, hoping to bump into something. To this day, the standard anthropologist, the anthropologist of the standard model, can't explain how they did it. And they keep looking for magic keys like, oh, they were seeing certain kinds of vegetation in the water and they guessed that there was an island over there. Or they could see cloud formations above an island from a distance and know that there was an island underneath that cloud. They keep looking for something because, like the blind people, they can't see the operative factor. And the operative factor was simply that you know. The third part of collective telepathy and knowing would include some level of consciousness influencing or mental influencing. I think George Lucas in the Star Wars movies with the Jedi Knights really nailed that down. Being able to say to someone, or not even say, to think towards someone, and have that have a deep influence on their future behavior. Consciousness shifting, that to the ability to, through ceremony or through some mechanism of learning or whatever, to shift consciousness to another level or another point of view. Consciousness transfer between one being and another being. Indigenous people all around the world have always said that they have the ability to transfer their consciousness to another animal, or even into plants, even into stones, to be able to move that consciousness, their consciousness, outside of their body into another body, to transfer, so that that the Inuit people in Alaska and Canada routinely talk about becoming the caribou. And again, the standard scientist will say, oh, that's an interesting folk tale, but nobody can become the caribou. Nobody can become a salmon. Nobody can transfer into that. What if we start treating this for what it is, that this is just an artifact or an ability of collective telepathy and knowing? And then finally, collective telepathy and knowing would be, an example of that would be communication via some level of transcendence, that I can talk to a transcendent being, a being that does not have a body, and then another village can come by and talk to that same being and get information from that being. Since I don't live in the transcendence, I know some people who do, but since I don't live there, I can't talk about it other than to say, for thousands and thousands of years, human beings have reported that they had the ability to do this. Therefore, we need to stop looking at them as either crazy or giving like folk tales, and start looking at them as perhaps pointing to how this field actually operates. Okay, so the second of the five latent powers are spatial powers, being able to affect or catalyze actions on material objects at a distance. That has a number of different aspects to it. One is transportation, and this is something that I heard regularly when I was in Ladakh. Tales of people being able to move from one location to another at great speed, or actually without any time interval, that you dematerialize from one location and you rematerialize at another location with no time interval. The second aspect of spatial powers we've just talked about, navigation. Being able to cross vast distances while knowing your destination. You weren't guessing or wandering around. For those of you who saw the Lord of the Rings movie, you remember when Frodo and Sam were wandering around in all those bogs, and at one point they say, wait, we've been here before. We're just walking around in circles. Okay. Well, if you're using this latent power of navigation, you would never be walking around in circles. You would know the destination. The third part is translocation. Having one's consciousness in a different location and position than your body is in. Now, a number of us have had this experience, and so many times that it's regularly reported in scientific journals. The number of people who have reported that they were having some kind of an operation, some kind of a surgical procedure that required them to be put unconscious. And so they were administered anesthesia, but instead of their consciousness disappearing, it just moved outside of their body, and it existed elsewhere in the operating room. And so the number of people who have reported that that during the operation they could look down from the ceiling at their body, at the surgeon opening them up. They could, when they came back to a consciousness, they could report not only what the surgeon was talking about when they were so-called under, but also how the surgeon was moving around the room. Now, you could say, oh, well, something happened and their ears didn't get knocked out. Okay, but they could say how many people were in the room and what they were doing. They would be able to report what was happening in the room. The next aspect of spatial powers is bilocation, being in two or more distinct locations at once, so that I can be here in my home in Portland, Oregon, and I can be in a cave in Ladakh at exactly the same time. The next level is object moving and object manipulation. For example, cutting and moving megalithic stones. You are familiar with the Great Pyramid. I had the, I don't even want to call it honor, the awe-inspiring moment of glimpsing and looking at and then walking up to and touching the Great Pyramid. That's one of my true life markers. We all know the standard story that this is the egomaniacal grave of the Pharaoh Khufu, and that this thing is 4,000 years old. Well, as soon as you look at it, you recognize this is a lot older than 4,000 years, and this is nobody's grave. Okay, and I'll be talking more about that at this event on the next Friday after next. But even more stunning than the Great Pyramid is the recent finding of that took me to Turkey, took me to the city of Sanliurfa, Turkey, and where I tried to visit. I was too sick to do so. Tried to visit Göbekli Tepe, which is the site of these megalithic stones that have been standing for 12,000 years. Now, hunter-gatherers don't cut and carry and stand upright on their pointy ends 20-ton stones. So something had to move those objects and manipulate those objects. I am not of the belief that outer space beings did this. And the reason is, I believe we're smart enough to do this, as long as we let go of this notion that our senses and our abilities stop at 5 senses. Okay, the next level of spatial powers is object sensing. Seeing and knowing objects from a distance, of knowing when someone is coming, knowing what where water would be, and you're familiar with dowsing, and dowsing could easily be explained by someone accessing a field, locating food sources, locating water sources, locating the things that you need of life, and just knowing that they are there. And then finally, weather control. And again, people, indigenous people readily report ceremonies that bring the rain, ceremonies that control floods, ceremonies that put you in connection with the all. Okay, so the next level of powers are temporal powers, time shifting. And I think that most of us, many of us, have had the experience of time being fluid, being much more fluid than the watch or the clock is telling you. I've had the experience of time speeding up. I've also had the experience of time slowing down, that I thought that 5 minutes had gone by, and a few hours had gone by. Monks and mystics regularly report time stopping altogether. And in temporal powers, I also put the ability to shift realities, to shift from the story that we're living right now to an alternate story, to a different track. Now, we say, because we're thinking as an individual, that I become a different person. But I'm not the one becoming the different person. All of us are making a shift, and it shifts the very fabric of our reality. And then the last of the temporal powers is our forecasting, oracular abilities, our fortune telling. That again, if we think about this from the point of view of a field, then let's say that you are in a body of water, and you're like a lake, and you are very, very still. So there's no ripples at all in the lake. And someone on the far side of the lake drops a big stone into the lake. You can see the ripples on the lake coming at you well before you would feel it. And a person with forecasting ability would just be looking at or experiencing this these waves of future coming at them. Now we accept that I can look across the lake and see ripples coming toward me. But similarly, some of us can see the field of life that we're in, which doesn't have a beginning and an end. We're just in a lake. We're in a field. We're in the ocean of living, and rocks are getting dropped in all the time, and some of us know how to read those rocks. The next of the latent powers would be communication powers. First level is nonverbal communication with other aspects of your own self. And I've had these really interesting situations where I have ducked. I'm not just kind of minding my business, and I duck, and an object went flying right by my head. Something would have put my eye out if I hadn't ducked. And I wasn't conscious of ducking. The only thing I was conscious of was, wow, I feel foolish down here. Oh, wow, look at what just happened. My head would have gotten ripped off. And so that was a nonverbal communication with some aspect of my own being. The next level of communication powers are nonverbal communication with other human beings. These may be other beings who have bodies, like parents and children regularly report being in nonverbal communication with their children or with their parents. Twins. I was watching a set of twins driving their parents nuts in the restaurant the other day. They had sat down. It's a boy and a girl, and they sat down, and in about 5 minutes, they both at the same time without talking to each other, stand up, switch their plates around, and sit down. And the parents are like, "Why did you just do that?" And the girl who had moved, they both moved to the other side of the table, said, he wants to see what's on television right now. And nobody was paying attention to the television. I didn't even know there was a TV over my head. And they knew it. And they had this conversation that said, yeah, let's switch seats. And boom, they did it. Okay? So that communication can take place with beings with bodies. But it also can take place with beings who don't have bodies. With our ancestors. And this gets into the next level, communication with transcendent beings like gods, goddesses, avatars, etc. This is all simply accessing the holonic field of consciousness. The next level is communication with other earth beings, with other species. This is the work that Rupert Sheldrake talks a great deal about. And this is, and I strongly urge you to read any of Sheldrake's books, especially his latter ones. Dogs That Know When Their Owners Are Coming Home is one of them. And the other one is The Sense of Being Stared At. And he is actually using scientific methods of investigation to investigate these powers. The communication with other earth beings is really profound because instead of us trying to tell the earth how to heal herself, instead of us trying to do the same kind of manipulation that has damaged the earth to try to heal it, what we would do is go to a completely different level and ask the earth, ask other beings what we can do to be helpful and to be healing. Then the next level is communication with past or future beings or with other worlds. Remember what I said about the dropping the stone in the pond. We are the stone. We are affecting our future by having this conversation. But we're also being affected by our future. And we can send messages to our future and to our past, and we can hear those messages. We can think about the person we were 10 years ago or 5 years ago. Think about a decision that you were that was difficult for you, and then send yourself a message. This is how it turned out, and it turned out okay, so make that decision, and that will make it easier to make that decision. We can also have communication with other worlds, and I'm not saying that space aliens exist or anything like that, but if they do not. Given the fact that human beings have these abilities, there's no reason for them not to have these abilities. So it's not going to be landing on the mall in Washington, D.C. saying, "Take me to the president." It's going to be regularly talking to beings who are operating from a holonic consciousness. Finally, the next level of the last level of latent powers is what I call bodily powers. There's been a lot of research on monks and mystics able to change their heart rate, change their respiration. Monks who meditate naked in a snowbank and melt all the snow around them for 10 feet without getting cold themselves. People who have reported not eating food for years and under scientific test conditions. Also, it is regularly reported now of the healing power of prayer, that I not only can change my body, I can change your body by focusing on your body, focusing attention on your body, and focusing on focusing the field of the life field in and on your body in such a way that whatever happens, you get better. I think I'm going to say more about that on 2 Fridays from now. Okay. So I don't have a whole lot on that because that gets us focused back on being individuals, and I'm less concerned about that in terms of these latent powers, and more concerned about the ones that bring us together into a group context. And so finally, I'm suggesting that instead of referring to them as latent powers, because they're only latent among people who act like Solons, which are not the majority of human beings on our planet. So these aren't latent powers, but holonic powers, and the powers of being a holon. Because of that, what we can do, what we should do, and I think what our next step is to start looking at how we activate these holonic powers. And if we do that, I think that we will be in a vastly different reality. Instead of worrying about how much carbon human beings have put into the atmosphere, I believe that holonic humans will simply be able to say to the Earth and her weather systems. Let's take the carbon out. And that the Earth herself will respond. The response may be that the carbon just simply falls from the sky. Or the response may be that we humans adjust to being in an ice age. We've lived through it before. Or a tropical heat age. We've lived through it before. Human beings are resilient. We need to stop acting like what we want is the only way the Earth can possibly be. Okay. I am putting a marker here. I'm going to hit pause. Your question or your comment was first of all that there's different terminologies, but you basically are in agreement that you're saying that in Qigong you wouldn't call it five latent powers, you'd call it something else, and every culture calls it something else. But I believe it's all the same thing. And then you're also saying, how do we activate these powers? The thing that came through in the cave, loud and clear, is, number one, you can't activate them as individuals. You can't say, okay, I'm going to go into meditation and I'm going to activate all five latent powers. This is like saying, like one bee saying, I'm going to make a hive. Well, no, you can't do it as one bee. You have to do it as a collective, as a hive. By definition, the field isn't accessed by individuals. And when individuals try to access it, they get pieces of it. It's like they get glimpses of it, and it also gets distorted through the delusion of their individuality. So you see people developing, wild powers like lightning shooting from their fingers, or abilities to bend metal objects at will and things like that. But it negatively affects their personality in some ways. It's almost like these powers are too big to be held by individuals. And so I believe that our challenge, or I should say our opportunity, is to develop these as to develop this as collective. And I think that you also hit on something, that it is using ancient technologies to access these, like Qigong, like prayer and meditation, like chanting and things like that. However, we get to use all of them, and we get to use them in such a way that we're not how can I say, that we're not bound by the limitations of a particular doctrine or a particular creed or anything like that. Let's use all of them. Okay, your second part had to do with why did I put the power of prayer in the bodily powers part and not put it in communication powers. Well, I think it is a part of communication powers, but I was thinking very specifically about the reports by Larry Dossey and others of being able to affect an individual's healing by by having others pray for them. Okay, and I don't know if all of us know about Larry Dossey's research, so I'll give you a really quick rundown. He's written several books on this. Larry took a bunch of heart patients in the San Francisco Bay Area who are getting a very specific heart valve operation. The prognosis of the operation was that it's a very successful operation. It's done all the time, and it has a very set trajectory. A person is back on their feet and they're active within 6 weeks of having the operation. What he did was took the several hundred people in the Bay Area who would have this operation and divided them into two groups. One group was the control group. They just got the best medical care that's available to them, and they didn't have anybody in his group praying for them. He took the other patients and he divided them into 10 or 15 different groups, and he gave them to various religious groups throughout the Bay Area. And the only thing he said to them was, here is a person. Just all they have is the person's first name, John. And they say, John is in need of prayer. They didn't say that he had a certain heart valve operation and he was still in the hospital or anything like that. And this group would, and the only qualification was that the group had to meet regularly. The group would meet regularly and would pray for John. Everyone who got prayed for came out of the hospital in half the time as the unprayed for group. Now the piece that gets my sister very upset is that it did not matter what the religion of the group was. It didn't matter whether they were Christians, Buddhists, Muslims, Jews, Baha'is. It just simply didn't matter. They all got out. They were all benefited from prayer, and they were all benefited equally from prayer. It did. Well, the Christians didn't do a better job than the Baha'is. So I thought that was all very interesting. So does that respond to the couple of points that you raised? Correct. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. That's why I put it under bodily powers. Yes. Okay. Other questions or comments or thoughts on this? Neat. Yeah. When you are standing in front of the Great Pyramid, again, we've all seen pictures of it. You see pictures from every possible aspect. This might be one of the most photographed buildings in the world. Okay. And when you're standing there and you're seeing the regular size stones are 15, 20 tons. And then you look up at the big ones, the ones that frame the front door for the pyramid. And you realize that this thing is hundreds and hundreds of tons, perfectly shaped, set on edge, etc. We, right now in our society, can't do that. We can't make a pyramid. We can't cut the 20-ton stones of Göbekli Tepe. Okay, we have no theory on how they did it. Unlike the pyramids, Göbekli Tepe has been carbon dated. It's carbon dated to 12,000 years ago, according to the standard model of what we know about the world. 12,000 years ago, human beings were Neolithic. That means that they were Stone Age. That means that the most advanced artifact of human civilization was a spear. So people with spears cut and intricately carved these granite blocks, 20-ton blocks, carried them on their spears 2 or 3 miles, and then set them up on their edge to the point that they're, like I said, they're still standing after 12,000 years. And we have to say that something else is going on. Now, again, there are lots and lots of reports of groups of people moving stones. There is I just read an account for a Buddhist group, and this group of Buddhists would get together and they would beat drums, they would blow those long, long horns, and they would chant. And the stone would just lift into the air and would land in where they wanted it to land. They were building a monastery up on a cliff. And then they get another stone and they'd chant and they'd blow the horns and they'd beat the drums and that stone would lift. That bears looking at, and that bears us being able to think about them. And so, what's the guy's name that did he was famous back in the 50s and 60s for metal bending the spoons and things like that? Yes. Thank you. Yeah. Now he gained fame for doing that, but what is the utility of bending a spoon? What you have is a bent spoon. It's right. It's a demonstration of a power, but what we have to do, again, and I would. This is my suggestion for us, is to move beyond using these powers to say, to study them in a field, in a laboratory. I'm not knocking laboratory study. I am so happy that IONS is doing their studies on non-local viewing. I'm so happy that Rupert Sheldrake is doing his studies on the morphic resonance fields. I'm happy that they're doing it so I don't have to do it. What we have to do is focus on application, I believe, and focus on how we make these fields useful to our mutual and shared goal, which would be a world that works for all beings. Other thoughts or other questions or other additions or other comments? And try to repeat the question. And I think you correctly stated, energy is just energy. The field is just a field. The field is not a good field. It's not a bad field. It's just a field. Okay? What we do with the field can be seen as positive or negative based on the ultimate goal, okay? And this is why the first slide up, I stated my personal goal, I stated Common Way's organizational goal, and I stated what I believe is, or at least should be, a meta vision for all human beings on the planet and all beings on the planet. And that is a world that works for all beings. Once I state that, I can then say, by doing X with this field, we will move closer to the possibility of a world that works for all beings, or we move further apart from the ability to create a world that works for all beings. So let me say a little bit more what I mean by that. All of you physics nuts know that in the standard model there are 4 classical fields, or 4 powers. The gravitational field, the magnetic field, and the strong and the weak nuclear forces. That's the stuff that the classical or the standard model scientists say is running the world, or those are the principles underlying all of reality. Well, they just know a little bit about all of reality. The indigenous folks have known a lot more about all of reality. And someone asked the Native American shaman and leader Black Elk what he thought of nuclear energy. This is right around the time of Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and exploding the first nuclear weapons. And how come your people didn't discover this? And he said something that was very profound. He said, the old Lakota were wise. They knew that there were stones inside the earth that had fire in them. And they were wise because they left them alone. They didn't pull them out, concentrate them, and turn them into what we've got right now in terms of either nuclear weapons or nuclear waste. And so I believe that there is a role for nuclear energy in a world that works for all, but not any way that we've been doing it in the very manipulative power over creating waste, creating the most toxic substances on Earth and thinking that's okay. So on the one hand, you are absolutely right. Energy is just energy. The only time it becomes any different than energy is just energy was when I set the goal of a world for all. Let's use one more analogy, and then I'll actually shut up. At least for 10 seconds. Let's say that you're going to get in your car and you're going to drive. Well, fine. People do that all the time. They probably do it less now than they did in the good old days. But I remember, people saying, let's go for a Sunday drive. Let's get in the car and ride around with no destination. If that's your goal, then any north, south, east, or west, any destination will do. As soon as you set a destination, you then can apply, am I going closer to my destination or am I going further away from my destination? So let's say you're in Chicago and you want to come to Portland, Oregon. So you get in your car and you start heading toward New York. You probably aren't going to get there. Okay, that's not the way to go. As soon as you set the destination that says, I'm going to Portland, you eliminate almost all of the other possibilities other than going through Montana. And so the people who use the goal of, I want the world to be a better place, because that goal is so indistinct, because it is so unmeasurable. A person who picks up a cigarette butt on the ground has made the world a better place. Because it is so amorphous, it's almost like getting in your car and going for a Sunday drive. There are people who are exploring nuclear power right now because they want the world to be a better place. But if you want the world to work for all beings, you've set the goal. You said, I want to go to Portland. And so a lot of other destinations become eliminated from that, or get eliminated from that. So yeah, so that's and one of the other things that you said about enlarging the field, that's exactly what we need to do. So when we, for example, I just had a notice flash up on my screen and it took my concentration away. When we will be with the common way consciousness centers coming into meditative holonic states with each other, our goal is not to strengthen the Shariff consciousness field. The goal is not to strengthen the JL consciousness field. The goal is for us to strengthen this holonic consciousness field that all beings, including all human beings, will then be able to access once they recognize that they're in the field. And at that point, things are going to get really, really cool, and they're going to be really we're going to develop in ways that we can't even imagine right now. And we need to look at ancient texts. We need to go back to the Vedas. We need to go back to the Mahabharata. We need to go to the ancient texts to see how did people live back then, and I could say more, but that's a good place to stop. And again, I don't know if that responded adequate. As I started off saying, I don't believe that the purpose of looking at the latent powers is, trying to see how many angels dance on the head of a pin. It's not to research for research's sake. It is research and action for a purpose. Having said that, the thing that I received as part of my download in the cave on the Doak River in the Himalayas is to open these global consciousness centers that will act as focusing agents for the holonic powers, the holonic consciousness. And I'm using the term holonic to get past this notion of group consciousness. A group of 5 or 6 people can work to develop their consciousness, and they can. But what we are doing is trying to tap into and feed into and strengthen this much, much larger field than 5 or 6 people. So I got this message, this invitation in these marching orders to open up 3 to 5 of these global consciousness centers around the world. And it was very specific that I'm not to open 1, I'm not to open 2. It has to be at least 3. And I've been searching for clarity on this. Like, is it 3 in Portland? Is it 3 in America? Is it 3 internationally? And it's very interesting when I start looking at the places where I have had some impact. I can identify really quickly 5 areas. Sri Lanka, for example, Nepal and Ladakh. They're not close to each other, but they share a very similar footprint in terms of their energy capacities. Bali, which has been its own energy center for, well, thousands of years. New Zealand, which has been an interesting energy vortex of both Western energy and Maori energy, and the United States, most notably here in the Portland area, where I've had some fairly significant investment of time and energy. So those are the five areas, and I've got good context there. People who I've already talked to about this and who would be interested in the development of a consciousness center that is not focused on any particular religion, but is actually focused on whatever it will take to develop the consciousness context. Then we've got a pretty good footprint. And what is needed at this point, and I've been very clear that to do this and do it right and do it in such a way that it will spread, needs something like $3 to $5 million, okay, to do it large enough to have an impact that people will want to replicate, okay. I believe that people are going to wind up feeling really, really good. They're going to be feeling excellent. And people are going to be going to the consciousness center for this feel-good energy. But the purpose is not to have a bunch of people sitting around grooving on each other. The purpose is really going to, the notion of the groovy energy will be a byproduct. It's not going to be the main product. Think about the different movements that have centered around personalities. You know, and all the ones that come to mind right now are unfortunate ones. Jim Jones in Guyana, Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh in good old Oregon here. The Christian televangelists that are busy raking in cash that they spend on themselves. What would happen if you shift the energy and shift it in such a way that you shift it away from individuals and away from one religious teaching, and you get the collected energy of the Christians, the Muslims, the Jews, the Baha'is, the Buddhists. You start compounding that energy. That, I think, is going to, at that point, and maintaining this meta vision of a world that works for all beings, being the kind of centralizing vision, then and having people in those 5 locations I just talked about, and maybe even South Africa. I just found out yesterday I may be invited to go down to South Africa for the first time in the fall, and so I would love to have. I guess I could go on and add Buenos Aires, Argentina, as a good group, common way group that I haven't interacted with in a number of years. Mexico, there are all sorts. Cuba, there are all sorts of places that have been seeded with this notion of a world for all, and to be able to go in and create. Catalyze this integral holonic consciousness, I think, is going to be really, really exciting. I hope I sound excited. You know, it's when I told people I came from the cave, I told them I feel like I got my marching orders, and for the first time in 21 years, I really feel that Common Way is coherent and articulable. I feel like I can actually tell people what Common Way actually is about and what it means and what we are focusing on, and so.